Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Pilates Hour. Really excited to be breaking down a lot of the exercises in the family of the rollover. So I get a lot of requests, so I thought, well, let's just do it. So the rollover. Some of the things that I like to talk about, because we definitely know that it's about spine mobility, right? That's kind of a given. Some people still kind of mistakenly think it's about strength, and I guess compared to the amount of mobility you have, is you might not be strong enough if you're lacking mobility, and those two kind of go hand in hand. We sometimes talk about load, we talk about strength, we talk about mobility, all of these things that have to really play well together. And so as much as it's a mobility exercise, yes, if you don't have the mobility, you might need a little bit more muscular effort to help you go into the rollover. So yes, that's part of it. We also need a reasonable amount of hip flexion mobility. Now, not so much, and this is something we talk about when all of the, teachers get together and we talk about, our favorite exercises and how should it be. We talk about, does the hip flexion go to its maximum before rolling over for something like short spine? So we kind of have to just see, like, what does the person have, and does too much hip mobility maybe make it so that you're not seeing all the spine mobility, or does somebody lacking in hip mobility enough that they can't even get their legs over their body? So a lot of times we'll talk about the props that we use. So lots of people put in a foam roller under the pelvis, or they might put a spine corrector or a baby arc or something under the pelvis to help with the spine mobility. But what I always think about too is we're also changing the amount of hip mobility that's needed. So the more that my pelvis is up, and I'll demonstrate a lot of these things in a moment, relatively, I'm not in the same amount of hip flexion. If this is where my fingertips are touching the heel of my hand is my hip joint, I don't have to have so much. If my hips are higher, I'm not in as much hip flexion. So think about how your modifications not only are changing the spine, but also changing what's needed at the hip. Because you might have a little too much mobility, and that makes it difficult for you to do the rollover in your hips, and you might lack a little bit of hip mobility, and that may be what makes it hard. And that would be something like a mechanical advantage, right? If your legs are way out here and here is your body, it's going to be tough to start a rollover with your legs out like you're doing the 100, right? Your legs have to get over you before you can start to go into the motion. So those are some things that you can keep in mind as well. Some other things that we have kind of a fine line, it's that catch-22 of, if I do it a little bit, it's helpful, and if I do it too much, it's not helpful. And that's pressing the arms into the mat. So as you're talking about it, thinking about it, doing it, and teaching it, be aware that a lot of pressing the arms down into the mat for the rollover, and this would be the same for short spine or long spine, it starts to potentially engage and kind of kick on your spine extensor muscles. And that's going to be difficult. We want the flexors to be working as we're doing the rollover, not the extensors. So there's an amount that you can push your arms down that's really helpful for people. And then if you cue maybe to push too much, you might actually start somebody moving a little bit toward extension, or at least their extensor muscles would be a little bit more on than they need to be lengthening to go into the rollover. Just something to keep in mind. Also, how we describe it as teachers. And if you've done a class with me, a reformer class, or some session where we're doing some reformer work, and you've heard me teach either short spine or long spine, I definitely have different words that I choose and a different image for short spine than I do for long spine, because where you're rolling is different. And the rollover is even a little different than that. So short spine ends up being your legs at a little bit of an angle. Long spine, your legs are more toward vertical. And a rollover, your legs are really pretty much getting to horizontal. So the words roll over are really helpful because if somebody thinks about rolling up again, they might just be working against themselves enough that it makes it hard to get over. So rolling over as a cue rather than rolling up. And I don't always use the shoulder stand term or image. Sometimes I do. Depends on who I'm teaching. Because again, for some people, a shoulder stand is more like long spine, and a shoulder stand for other people is more like the plow from yoga. And it's, you could say, oh, well, that's not what it is. That's not right, or that's wrong. It's whatever the person comes with. So whatever they think it is in their reality, that's what it is. So we kind of have to be respectful of that. It's a good opportunity to help them understand when you use these terms, this is what you mean. And that's pretty much for any cue for anything. We can talk about that for anatomy. When I talk about this is what I mean. And I think it's important for our students to have that and for us as teachers to make sure that we're explaining those things, because it might just be that somebody comes in with a different perception of what a rollover or a shoulder stand is. We can also look at just our plain body types. So not so much as somebody heavier or lighter than somebody, but what are the proportions of our bodies? So does somebody have, and you might be, thinking this for your own body, is your torso a little bit longer and your legs tend to be a little bit shorter, right? And we could talk about all the different body types, but just in general, what's the relationship and the length of your torso compared to your legs? Do you have really, really long legs and your torso is average length, but in comparison to your legs, your torso is shorter and your legs are longer, or vice versa? Do you have a quite long torso, but are your legs a little bit shorter compared to that? So this makes a difference in who has an easier time with an exercise like the roll up and who might have an easier time with an exercise like the roll over. And I'm sure you've met people that can do one effortlessly and really struggle with the other. I'm one of those people. For me, a roll up is never just an easy exercise I can just do. I can do it. Takes me a little bit of preparation, and if I have not been practicing for a while, it's harder for me. Other exercises I could do, I could roll out of bed and do it completely cold, and I own that motion. A rollover is one of those movements. I can do a rollover pretty much anytime. It's pretty easy for me, and but that comparison happens, where I'm thinking, gosh, it's still spine mobility. Why can't I do the rollover so easily, and it's challenging for me to do the roll up? Maybe it has something to do with just the proportions of my body. My legs could be a little bit heavier, right? If somebody holds your feet, that you have all of those different modifications. So just keeping in mind those things. It's not. I don't want it to ever be an excuse. But it is the reality, right? Our bodies are all adapted for different things. And that brings me back to the idea of modification. And so I brought out, I don't happen to have a spine corrector at my house. I'll get one soon. But I do have an old foam roller, and I will use this, and I use this with clients quite frequently. Anything that you can put under the pelvis, as we talked about, to already kind of bias the body into the motion is really helpful for people. So this is one that I'll show and we'll talk about. But I wanted to talk about modification in general, not for this exercise necessarily, but for all exercises. And I really want us to think about how we can use modifications to get somebody to where they can do the full movement rather than rely on the modification to be there for you all the time forever. And so we really want to make sure that we're making progress in our own movement, we're making progress in our clients' movements if you're a teacher, so that eventually somebody doesn't need the help. They don't need the modification any longer. And that's tough because it's some things you modify and then, a few weeks later, you've got it. It's easy, you can do it, you've figured it out, you've changed your strategy, maybe you have just a little more mobility, a little more strength somewhere, a little bit better control, and you can do it. Other changes of the body tissues, so if we're thinking about improving spine mobility, tissue extensibility, all of these different things, that might take longer. It might take 6 months, it might take longer than that. So we want to still be giving people the experience of doing the motions without so much of the modification. So can you do, maybe you're doing rollover on the mat with something under the pelvis. But then when you get to short spine, either on the trapeze table or on the reformer, you don't have that. And you're starting with the body flat, the legs are coming over, and you're rolling into your rollover position or your short spine position. So just as a general train of thought, have that in mind. It's kind of like using orthotics for people who just don't exercise their feet muscles very much, right? We just put an orthotic in their shoe. It's like, oh, you're good to go. But really, have we changed anything, or are we just kind of supporting the body where it is? So wouldn't it be nice to, like we have crutches when you can't bear weight through your leg or your knee or your ankle or something, but eventually you don't have those crutches anymore and you get back to doing the activity? I want to just put that out there for all the different motions that we have trouble with and that our clients might have trouble with in anything. It doesn't even have to be Pilates, of doing your best to get past the prop that you're using. So just something to think about. So when we're thinking about the whole exercise family, and if I miss any, you guys can write them into the chat. I just brought up some of the most common exercises. So obviously we have the rollover. We have control balance. That's the scissoring motion from the shoulder stand. We have jackknife, which is the rollover, and that kind of starts to incorporate the position of long spine where we're going a little bit more vertical, we're flexing the hips a bit more, and then coming back to the rollover position. There's corkscrew, which I love, which is just the twisted rollover going around in each direction. And I also think about exercises like boomerang, even though we're not staying in the rollover position for any length of time, but it's the same shape, right? And it requires the same types of mobility. It's a nice variation though, because it does give you a little bit of momentum. And so if it's ever a little bit challenging to do the rollover, sometimes people will really excel at boomerang because it's just so much, they can just get over that little bit that they can't do with the momentum of their legs going over. So that's a nice one too. And then other exercises like open leg rocker, which again, if we're thinking about different bodies and different abilities, I know people who can do a rollover quite easily, but when they grasp their feet and they're holding on and they have to maintain this whole shape of their body while they're rolling back and forth, that's more challenging. Just the opposite, some people will hold their feet and it's like, wow, this is so much easier because it put me into the shape that I needed to be in and I could do it great. So again, don't be surprised by those things. Let's talk a little bit though about the preparations for it. And so let's go back even to some of our basic motions. And the one I want to start with is the chest lift. And looking at the chest lift and how, even though in chest lift we're coming forward into flexion and obviously in the rollover rolling back over into the shoulder stand position, it's really important that we have the mobility in our upper thoracic spine Otherwise, we're going to put a lot of stress up at kind of the junction of the head and the top of the cervical spine. So just brought out a little bit of an image that I want to show. I brought my spine fitter out. And I think I'm going to do it right here in front of the camera. I think that's going to be, let's see, about there. So you can see my mat, my stool. And we'll use the spine fitter as our spine, thinking kind of the vertebra. And what a lot of people do is they get their legs up and over, they start to do their motion, and then this part doesn't move very well. And so if this is the neck and the head, kind of starts to go something like that. So I have a lot of flexion here, not too much flexion in this the rest of my spine. As opposed to if I can have more motion just in these 3 segments here, and my rollover starts to look like this. That to me is a wonderful shape of the spine where there's not a hinge point or an excessive amount of motion here, but we were able to move it all the way through the spine into the rollover. So as an image, I like to use this. You guys have seen me with my origami spine or a slinky or whatever I have in the studio. I'll grab a spring off the trap table and I'll show the same thing so that clients really start to understand. And then it's helpful if you take a photograph of them, grab their phone or your phone if it's fine with them, but their phone is sometimes better so they have the photo, and show them what their spine looks like in comparison to the image of something that has really well distributed movement. So when we get into an exercise like chest lift, this is where people say, oh, chest lift, that's kind of an easy preparatory mat exercise. But actually, it's one that is not so easy and one that we still continue to need to focus on. So as I'm getting ready for it, I'm really identifying my lower back ribs not being stationary, but being able to expand. I sometimes will use my t-shirt as an example of that my back lower ribs are actually kind of gliding down toward the back of my pelvis a little bit to give me that, again, if you think of the spine fitter or the origami spine, that feeling of movement as opposed to just kind of crunching and holding. So as I'm doing my chest lift, and you guys are welcome to do these along. I know sometimes sitting for an hour, so if you want to jump down on your mat or on your trap table, or even seated in a chair, you can start to practice this idea of the chest lift coming up, and think just the image of your lowest back ribs kind of gliding down toward your pelvis. And that gives you an anchor point so that the rest of your ribs and your spinal segments can move. The other thing that you guys have heard me talk about a lot, and I just keep bringing it back up, is the idea of chin to chest. And when we're going into our chest lift position or a roll down, if I'm practicing chin to chest and people are really doing this motion, this becomes a familiar movement. It becomes a place that I know I can move. And at the same time, I'm also noticing, maybe I'm not cognitively noticing it and aware of it, but the rest of my rib cage and my upper thoracic spine is not moving. I haven't done anything there. I've only moved at my neck. And so that's the exact opposite of where we want to be in our rollover. So start practicing your rollover in your chest lift, in your spine stretch, because it really is pretty much the same position, right? If I put my arms here, I would be pressing against the mat, and here I would be in my rollover position, but I wouldn't be there if I'm here doing just chin to chest. So another good reason why that's so important. Not only is it not so great at the neck, I mean, it's fine, but it's not particularly useful. You're missing the opportunity to move in the thoracic spine which is going to be needed for all of these movements. Okay. So let's take a look at some of the preparations and some of the things that I will do, even a little bit different to some things that you might have seen before. So we definitely can bring the pelvis up onto something and start just that idea, not even with straight legs and not intending to roll all the way over, but can I use the image of the roller rolling a little bit away from me? I'm not actually, it's not really going anywhere, but it feels like it would roll that way toward the end of my table. And I can just start to practice moving myself into some spine flexion and out of spine flexion. And again, I'm timing it with and really cognizant that it's happening as my hips are flexing a little bit more, but not just my hips. So I'm not just bringing my thighs closer to my torso. I am at the same time allowing, especially this part of my spine that's not yet touching anything, right? It's not on the mat and it's not on the roller. Maybe you can see it a little bit better that way, that I'm doing spine flexion and hip flexion at the same time. So again, as a preparation, you might start this in your classes long before you're going to do the exercise of the rollover, especially if we're teaching a mat class where we don't have a lot of help. And then you can start to progress a little bit to having the legs longer, or even softly bent is fine. And again, this idea of changing the body weight. So eventually, if I can get my legs to come over me enough, my pelvis will start to lift up a little bit. And it's kind of, for some people, not so comfortable to push on the roller. They actually do better with their hands on the mat. So I don't, again, expect people to be able to go all the way over, but I do want them to start to unweight their pelvis from the roller as they're going. So that's some of the ways that I do some of the prep. And then I just start with that same idea of pressing and letting my body start to lengthen and become a little heavier into the mat. I don't really care that my legs are straight. I don't care that I'm actually pushing a little bit with my hands. I just want to get the feeling of that to start happening. And that sense of the spine elongating. So I'm not trying to roll over right away. I want to feel the influence that the change, so the weight of my thighs, the weight of my legs, and eventually as my pelvis rolls, the weight of that, how that influences the shape of my spine. And if I wait long enough, eventually the pelvis will start to come up a little bit. And this reminds me very much of one of the Feldenkrais lessons about learning how to stand up from a seated position. And I won't go into all the details. I don't know the entire lesson, but just the gist of, if I let my head come far enough forward, eventually I unweight myself from where I'm sitting. And it's kind of the same thing. So if we look at the leverage of it, I can start to get over, but I'm not trying to throw myself up in the air or push myself over. I'm letting it happen naturally. And that's where I think sometimes we try to rush through that. And we've got to get to the shoulder stand, or we've got to get to short spine. And we don't spend quite enough time letting the body figure out, oh wow, all of my paraspinal muscles have to lengthen a little bit more. My quadratus has to lengthen a little bit more to allow the motion to start. So again, if you can start early on with different movements that don't really require you going into the full thing, that's really helpful for people. That's a nice way to go about it. If you're teaching both people on the mat and the reformer and on the trap table, be relating this back to bridging with your feet at different heights. So bridging with your feet at the same level as your body doesn't give you as many options, right? It's kind of a low amount of movement before you're in hip extension and you can't go any farther. So feet up on the wall, feet up on a box, feet on the foot bar of your reformer, up in the knees bent over the bar, getting ready to do short spine on the reformer. All of those things are really helpful because they change the body position. They give you a little bit more room and space to move in. So those would be some things that I would start working with right away. And then eventually, sometimes you do have to kind of give yourself, again, a little bit of momentum and kind of just get yourself over into the rollover position. Hands behind the pelvis is fine. And as long as somebody's not struggling, that would be something that would be really good. So again, thinking of some related exercises where we do use the hands under the pelvis would be the scissors and the bicycle. Now the spine's in a little different shape, but again, it's getting somebody approximating the motion and approximating the position until they can get all the way over. And again, you guys can feel free to practice these along as we're doing it. It may bring up some questions for you. So if you can, and you're going to roll over, just allow people just to get there. And then you can put the hands behind the pelvis. And now is a great place to remind people, especially, I'm going to put my feet up here for a second just so I can balance. If they're up here, remember the picture of the spine fitter a moment ago, we want to get to more of a position where there's space between the chin and the chest. And then the hands can come under and the hips can come a little bit lower. And that might be more comfortable for somebody as opposed to being way over in the rollover position. So see how that feels and get people used to that for a while. It's also going to help them when you're getting especially into the scissor and the bicycle, the leg that is going low, that's also going to help them with the full leg circle. And one of my pet peeves as a teacher is to watch people do these beautiful rollovers. They roll back down and then they do this little tiny circle as opposed to coming way down and learning how to do the full leg circle. So when you're either with the roller under your pelvis, the spine corrector under your pelvis, or your hands under your pelvis, or something else, whatever other props you might have, be sure you're practicing and really emphasizing this part of the motion here so that somebody has the control in their body and they're starting to lengthen through the front of the hip, all the musculature there. And eventually when somebody does their leg circle, they can come quite far down and then come back up without losing control at the front of the body. The pelvis is being held up, and we've talked about this in other exercises. The pelvis is being held up by the roller, and my legs can move pretty freely out here without a lot of stress. So just another component of it that we don't think about sometimes in the rollover exercise. All right. Let me look back at my notes and just see what other things we have. Yeah, rolling. So we've probably touched on rolling a few times in some of the different webinars, whether they've been dedicated ones or when I'm teaching mat classes and different things, is the idea of the timing of rolling, seal, and eventually open leg rocker. And being able to, again, really experience upper thoracic flexion as much as we can. There's a lot of things there, the shoulder blades, all the ribs, the spine, the collarbones, the breastbone. There's a lot of structure there. But as much as we can, if we can get the mobility there, then we can get to the shoulder stand position. The head will touch the floor, but you're not putting weight into the head. And I think that's been a mistake that, at least in interpreting what don't push your head into the floor means or into the mat, not pushing into it, but touching, to me, are two different things. So when you're doing your rollover, you're rolling, the back of your head is probably going to touch the mat. That's okay. It needs to, for you to get your pelvis over your shoulder girdle. And then there's that natural little pause. It's like a breath happens. And then you roll yourself back up to find your sitting position. That timing is also really helpful, again, for learning the rollover. It's one of those things that if you're just trying to go through fast and muscle through it, it's not going to work. So let's try just a little bit of rolling and see how you feel with that idea of letting your head touch. It's something that is helpful. So going back, and you can do the very modified version of it where you actually allow your legs to help you. So you're rolling and rolling and not too worried about getting back up. Each time my head is touching, but I don't feel like I'm putting any pressure there. And I'm aiming for, and it doesn't happen every time, but I'm aiming for getting my pelvis a little bit more over my shoulder girdle and then using the momentum of my hips coming down to help roll me up into the starting position. So that's the timing there that I think it just lends itself to being able to get into the position a little bit easier. All right, so let's look at the rollover. And we're going to look at a couple of different positions of the arms. And this I like to do. So if any of you are able to do it, when we get to the rollover, the full rollover, I'm curious. I'll ask for who feels which version is a little bit more challenging, less challenging. And I have a theory, not a theory, but I have reporting, very unscientific reporting about who thinks this and who thinks that. Ah, interesting. Okay. So they were reporting in that a firm pillow under the base of the neck helps quite a bit. That's interesting. I'd have to see how that is. You just want to make sure if it's under the neck, then you're not pushing the head forward. That might work out really well. I'll have to give it a try and see how we feel about that. Thank you for letting us know. All right, so let's get it ready to roll over. And I can't see you guys, so you'll have to kind of check in with your own selves. When you get over, be sure to feel like you're standing across the top of your shoulder blade area, right up to the neck, but without pressing your head into the floor. And the other thing I want you to do is to very, very lightly press your thighs toward the ceiling, not lifting your feet up. Leave your feet where they are once you get there. And see if you can press your pelvis and your thighs up just a tiny bit and see if it helps the overall position of your spine. Let's give it a go. So begin, we don't need to work on the leg circle right now. We can just begin with the roll over. So starting to allow yourself there, wiggle around a little bit if you want to. It's sometimes the skin, your shirts, different things happen here. So you can get to this position and then begin to roll down slowly and really think about the elongation of all of your back muscles, your ribs, the bones of your body, so your spine and your ribs, and the lengthening. Sometimes I feel like we hold a little tight and we don't actually allow the body to really rest on the table. So have that in mind as well. Starting to go over. Open the legs and then allow the body to, even though you're keeping that little feeling of pressing up in the thigh, allow the ribs, allow the spine, allow the waist to really give into the mat or the surface that you're on. The other great place, and we've talked about this for other exercises, to work on these exercises is on your mattress. It's really nice to do these exercises on a soft surface because it gives your body somewhere to go, where being on the mat sometimes is quite firm and quite hard. So if it's troubling, you can't get it right away, try doing it on your mattress. All right, so here we go. This is our quiz question. After you get into your rollover, I want you to reach your arms back overhead. Now this not only is the preparation to get ready to do our control balance, where we're going to not only scissor, but take a hold of the foot, it's also going to be interesting to see how many of you feel that the reach of your arms helps you as you roll your body down. Now, you definitely don't have to put your hands all the way down. I keep mine up in the air a little bit, and that weight away from center and elongation and probably a bit of lengthening if we think about both sides of the fascial system on the front and the back, it gets me a little bit of assistance and allows me to roll down smoother. So I'm curious if you're going to practice it at home, and you can report back in the chat, who likes it better with their arms down? Who likes it better with their arms over? So here we go. And you can start with your hands down to roll over. Now, once you get here, again, you can give yourself a little bit of help. I'm trying not to hit my microphone. I'm going to move the mic just so I'm not hitting it with my face. I shouldn't be, but I'm going to move it just a little bit down. All right. So starting to roll, and then start to take the arms overhead. Feel how that length gives you a little counterbalance so that your roll down can be a little more controlled. And again, I don't put my hands all the way down. That's too far for me, but I do have it up here. So I'm curious, as you've been practicing, and if you've worked with me before, you've done that. Unstable with arms overhead, yep. Yes, there's about, it's not quite half and half. More stable overhead, more control, arms overhead, good. It's maybe half and half, 2/3 and a third of who likes it overhead and who doesn't. And again, it's body shapes, body types. I'm just looking at all the good. Arms overhead, more controlled. Arms by the side, yep. Yeah, just different, just fun to do. And then once we're there, once you've experienced having the arms overhead, now we can start to go into the scissoring motion of control balance. Let me see, a couple more. Interesting. Carlina said more spinal mobility with the arms overhead, but less control at the end. Cool. Jessica, wow. Arms overhead was a whole new articulated experience. Fantastic. Good. More unstable with arms overhead. Yep. And some people have the comments just to hosts and some to everybody, so that's why I'm reading them all off. Overhead, arms by side. Let's see what Maria has here. So she wrote in there, and she wrote to everybody. You can see it if you have the chat open. I think it's different if you use your arms forward, pressing into the floor. You activate the dorsal muscles to assist the movement of the legs going backwards and the stability of the trunk. Interesting. All right, about the same. Good. And then, of course, it's fun to see, can you roll over with your arms overhead too? That's a whole additional layer of challenge. All right, cool. Good. So then going into control balance and into jackknife, again, just kind of depends on the person. Some people will do better because they have their arms down and they can get into the jackknife movement a little easier. Some people, once they get there, they're okay, and they can, as I think Amy just said, one arm and then the other arm. Sometimes it's necessary to kind of get one and then the other there to play around with it. And I teach control balance for a long time without the hands actually grasping the foot. So I will do rollover, arms can stay down, and start going into the scissoring, because what again is important is a lot of the whole movement is happening over the head, and people want to put their feet on the floor. and they're forgetting the counterbalance that's happening with the other leg. And that's what I mentioned. If you're going to put the foam roller or a spine corrector or a baby arc under the pelvis, make sure you're practicing the leg series there so that we get both the mobility and the awareness to get the hip and leg that's going toward extension as part of the movement. We really want to bring that piece in. Otherwise, it's just kind of back and the legs are kind of over the face. Let me see what the question is. Love the arms overhead. Good. All right. So let's take a look at that and look at the scissoring part and the jackknife piece. And I didn't mention it, but if you have a chair nearby, like your Pilates chair, or a chair or a table, or you happen to have your trap table right by you, you can definitely use the arms for assistance here if you've not done that before. The idea of just gently, what I normally do for my own assistance is I feel like I would slide my arms upward as opposed to pushing or pulling. I really just feel like I'm just using my arms to slide up just a bit. And then once I'm there, I don't really do a whole lot here. So it's just kind of a light touch. And then I can start getting into this part. And again, it's the leg that's going away and over. That is really what I'm interested in. Not so much on the foot that's coming down. I sometimes will just leave and I won't go so much with this foot coming down so that I can practice the feeling of the leg going away. And then we can get into bringing the arms overhead and taking that very light touch of the foot. Doesn't have to be a firm hold. It doesn't have to do anything. Sometimes just the light touch of the fingertips to the foot is enough to start with. And then you're not knocking yourself off balance as you're going into the scissor position. And then looking at our jackknife, I like to do either prep with the roller under, the feet on a box, the feet up on the wall, something where I can get into a bridge position and just, again, work on moving from the hip joint and really having the idea that my leg is moving, but not my trunk, because in the middle of my jackknife, I don't want a lot of motion happening at my body. I'd like to keep my body in the rollover and more move the legs up and down instead of kind of moving wherever there's a place in the body that moves easily. So, because that's often going to, again, be getting into a lot of flexion in the neck. So we try to keep that a little bit quieter in rolling. No matter where I put this mic, it's going to drop and touch me. Sorry, Melissa. Get it out of the way. There we go. All right, so again, what often happens, actually I'm going to hold on so I can show it a little bit more in slow motion. What often happens in jackknife is people get to their rollover position and then they flex their neck a lot and then they come back out of it. So what I'd like is to move my legs without really changing the distance between my breastbone and my chin, if you can. It'll move a little bit, but the idea of just getting that ability to move at the leg, at the hip joint, and not at the neck is tough, but it's something we really need to work on. So that would be the thing that I look at in jackknife, and then feel like at first, meet the person where they can roll down. So you've gone over, you've gone up, maybe you've done it a couple of times, and then it's nice to keep the legs up and try to roll down like long spine, but a lot of people don't have the control yet. So if needed in the beginning, bring the legs back over and let them roll down the old-fashioned way, right? The normal way. Over time, you can start to bring the legs higher and higher and roll down. You'll probably still use the arms a bit. It becomes a bit of a tricep exercise. But that way then people can be successful. They don't have to try that from the very start. All right. So a little bit of corkscrew. Let's talk about that. I'm just going to look in the chat really quick. Oh, there is a question. All right, good. So is it correct when going with the legs back, you get to touch the floor behind you with the fingertips before returning? All right, I think I understand. Let me read it one more time. I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. When going back with the legs, you get to touch the floor behind your head with your fingers. You could, if I'm understanding the question correctly. I think you're talking about control balance. And yes, if you wanted to have your hands down, I typically have my thumbs facing the table, so my thumbs might touch. That would be okay if you're talking about behind the head. I've never done it with the arms bent in that way, so I don't know if that's what you mean. But yes, you can pick the hands up to grab the foot in control balance. And then if you wanted to, you could have the hands touching, or you can have the hands and arms elevated a little bit and just get into the reach. So I hope I understood the question correctly. But yes, you can do that. Any modification is good. Any modification that gets you closer and closer and closer to doing the exercise, I feel is great, and we should be doing it. With your toes. Oh, okay. In the rollover, I'm assuming then. No problem. No need to apologize. So yes, there are people who do teach a lot of these rollover exercises where the feet come down. In general, I don't teach it that way. I want the legs to stay more horizontal or go up to the vertical position, depending on the different variations. Mostly because a lot of people, they need that little push up of the legs to keep the elongation in their spine. If somebody had really good mobility, it's fine to touch the feet. We do lots of movements that have that in other disciplines, in yoga especially. You'll see the feet come to the mat, so that's okay. If you wanted to maybe practice the scissoring motion from there, that might be a way to practice it, but I'd make sure that somebody's not just moving up in their neck and that they really are standing across their shoulders. So if they can do that, and you wanted to start with the toes touching the mat behind, I'm okay with that. That would be fine. I just really more concerned with the amount of pressure that's going through the neck. And again, not that that's in and of itself bad, but if we're working with people who haven't been in that type of a position, we just need to be careful the first few times that somebody does that position so that we know that their body is going to be accepting of that, because it might be quite different than something that they do all the time. So just something to think about there. All right. So one of the main things in crisscross, I love crisscross. That'll be another show. In corkscrew is that the spine stays in the same place on your mat the whole time. It rotates a little one way, rotates a little the other way, but it never leaves the midline of your mat. When people get in trouble is this whole idea of the pelvis going around to the side, and now you can't go anywhere. You've gone into side bending and you can't get back up and around to complete the movement. So when doing this, I like to teach it first in bridging, and I'm actually going to do it a little bit so that my head is toward the camera and my feet are away, and you guys can do this out of the bridge position as well. And this is a great place to really, again, identify where does the spine meet the mat, and can you maintain that the whole time? So ignore that my head will be off the table a little bit. And I'm going to show it here. So as I roll up, let me make sure, yep, you can see it. I'm going to rotate and roll down. Kind of feels like I'm doing it on the ladder barrel. And then I'm going to go to the other side. So one of the best exercises to teach corkscrew is the side to side exercise with either legs bent or legs straight to introduce spine rotation, but the spine stays in its alignment to the mat. So I'm not moving my pelvis around. So if somebody can do this, they can do the corkscrew bridging exercise, which is just rotating and coming up and coming down. And I do this early on in class with people because it feels really nice. They don't know that eventually they're going to do it from their rollover. They don't have any idea. And they just start to learn it and really embody that. So that's the idea of corkscrew. If for some reason you were to roll down and your hips were way over to the side, so my upper body's aligned with my trap table, but my pelvis is pointing over that way, you know you've gone into side bending as opposed to going into just rotation, right? So play with that a little bit. If you've not used that as a prep for the corkscrew exercise, it really gives people an idea of the movement, an idea of how to organize their body on the mat, and it makes them feel much more confident. They still might mess up a little bit the first few times of trying it, but it's helpful to have that point of reference. So you do that right away. You maybe do the side to side with the legs. They can feel how their body is rotating in space, but it's not changing its orientation to the mat other than rotation. So that's a helpful one. Boomerang, again, you get a little bit of help from momentum. And I learned boomerang from Lolita San Miguel years and years and years ago. And we, of course, always added in the ending part of the dying swan, which made it a little bit more fun and dramatic. But it still has all the same components of what we've talked about. A kind of smooth rhythm. It's not too fast. It has momentum. I go back, and then the weight of my pelvis and my legs help bring me back up to sitting. There's a moment that I pass through a little bit of a teaser position and then end up over my legs with the hands crossed. There's a few different ways to do it. Lots of teachers teach it. So let's do it together and then we'll finish up. I know we're getting close to the end of time for today, but love to hear in the future how it's going with your own performance of these rollover exercises, how it's going teaching. Is it getting a little bit easier? Are people feeling a little bit more successful? Hopefully they are. Hopefully this is giving you a couple more tools to start maybe working on it a little bit sooner or earlier in somebody's progression of Pilates, not saving it till the very, very end, especially if you have equipment. You can be practicing short spine as long as somebody has good spine health and no reasons why they can't be inverted. You can certainly start working on short spine to get them into the feeling of this. And it's a great, it's one of those things that when people can do it, they go, yes, I got this. It's a big accomplishment and really makes them feel like they've done something. So let's do our last little bit together, a little bit of boomerang. And we'll start from the rollover position or the spine stretch position and then go into the rollover position. And again, here you're already setting the stage of the shape of the body because it's going to be, even though the arms are in a different place, when I roll over, I should be about in this same position, just in the other direction. So again, this is a really important place to set the stage of what's going to happen. My legs are going to start to carry me over. I change I come up. I try to do it without hitting my wall. And then go over. So it doesn't have to be super fast. And it has little bits in it that are kind of fun to just hang out in the teaser or hang out in the spine stretch position. Oh yes, so good point, Suzanne. Discussing the contraindications for osteopenia and osteoporosis. This is a family of exercises that really is not safe for somebody with osteoporosis and probably also with osteopenia. And I'm sure you could probably, if you wanted to try it yourself and you had low bone density, it would probably be okay. But we never know when it's not going to be okay. We never know when that amount of pressure is going to be enough that it's going to cause a fracture. And so I don't let anybody in my classes who has low bone density do these exercises. I will give them other exercises to do. So I might do the pelvis on top of the foam roller and allow their legs to come over, their lumbar spine to flex a tiny bit, as long as they're not putting a lot of pressure into the chest or curving there. And just something to remember, that it's not only the spine position, but it's the spine position and holding the breath or the Valsalva feeling and increasing intrathoracic pressure. So if you did a rollover and you had that pressure, again, that might be enough that it could cause a fracture. So since we don't know, I just say we don't do it. I will give people, for all of our chest lift exercises, hundreds, roll-ups, all those things, I give them the ball behind their upper back and have them go into extension and then into neutral. Prop the pelvis up. They can do a lot of the similar movements with the pelvis propped up. They just wouldn't go all the way into the full rollover position. So yeah, that's something we have to make on a case-by-case basis. I'm just looking at Paola's comment. And yeah, so depending on what somebody has going on in their spine and their spine health, this might not be the best selection of exercises. But if you work on it, if somebody progresses and can do flexion, not osteoporosis, but can do flexion without any discomfort, you might try introducing it maybe as something like short spine. Again, depends on the person and all of their everything that they come with. So, well, I hope that everybody has had a good time today. I have. I love these exercises. And we really want to thank you all for the support that you give us, seeing the numbers of people that come to the webinars, the messages that I get from people, from students, from people who I don't know, who will send me an email and say, wow, thank you so much for the webinars. Please know that we really, really appreciate you and can't thank you enough for the support that you've given us. Thank you for sharing the links to the webinars, the recordings that you get mailed to you, and really building our network of Pilates lovers, Pilates enthusiasts. So just wanted to take that moment to thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.